The fluorescent lights in the lawyer's office buzzed like angry wasps above Naomi's head. She sat in a hard leather chair that squeaked every time she shifted her weight, staring at papers that made no sense. Numbers swam before her eyes, but one number stood out with crystal clarity: 0. That's what was left in her bank account. $0.00. I don't understand, Naomi heard herself say, though her voice sounded far away, like someone else was speaking. We had savings. We had investments. We had the house. The lawyer, a thin man with glasses that kept sliding down his nose, cleared his throat uncomfortably. He'd been Derek's lawyer, not hers. She couldn't afford one of her own. That should have been her first warning sign. Mrs. Morrison, as I've explained, your husband liquidated the joint accounts before filing for divorce. The house was in his name only, purchased before your marriage. The investment accounts were also solely in his name. You signed a prenuptial agreement 15 years ago that— I never signed a prenup, Naomi interrupted, her hands gripping the edge of the desk. Her knuckles had gone pale. We didn't have one. The lawyer slid a document across the desk. There, at the bottom, was a signature that looked almost like hers. Almost. The loops were too big. The N was wrong. But it was close enough that nobody had questioned it. This is fraud, Naomi whispered, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might break through her ribs. This isn't my signature. That's a serious accusation, Mrs. Morrison. Do you have proof? Expert analysis? Because Mr. Morrison's legal team has authenticated this document thoroughly. Naomi wanted to scream. She wanted to flip the desk over. She wanted to storm into Derek's office and demand answers. But she couldn't do any of those things because her hands were shaking too badly, and her vision was blurring with tears she refused to let fall in front of this smug lawyer who clearly thought she was an idiot. Where is he putting the money? She asked quietly. All our savings, where did it go? The lawyer smiled, and it was the kind of smile that made Naomi's stomach turn. I'm not at liberty to discuss Mr. Morrison's private financial affairs. What I can tell you is that the divorce is final as of today. You have 30 days to vacate the marital home. Mr. Morrison has been generous enough to pay for your first month's rent at a new location, which he considers more than fair given the prenuptial agreement. Generous, Naomi repeated, tasting the word like poison. He's giving me 1 month's rent after taking everything we built together for 15 years? Actually, Mrs. Morrison, according to the prenuptial agreement, he built everything. You were a bank teller when you married. Your financial contributions were minimal at best. That's when something inside Naomi cracked. Not broke, because broken things shattered into pieces. This was different. This was a clean split, like a frozen lake giving way beneath someone's feet. She stood up slowly, carefully, and looked the lawyer directly in his watery eyes. Tell Derek, she said, her voice steady now, cold and clear, that he can keep every penny. Tell him I hope it keeps him warm at night. Tell him I hope Brianna enjoys spending it. The lawyer's eyebrows shot up. I'm sure I don't know what you mean about. Tell him, Naomi continued, walking toward the door, that I'll be just fine without him. It was a lie. She had $300 in her purse, no job since she'd quit to support Derek's promotion to regional manager, and nowhere to live in 4 weeks. But she'd be damned if she'd let this snake of a lawyer see her fall apart. She walked out of that office with her head high and her back straight. She made it all the way to her car, a 10-year-old sedan that Derek had magnanimously allowed her to keep since he'd already bought himself a new luxury model. She climbed into the driver's seat, closed the door, and only then did she let herself feel it. 15 years. 15 years of waking up next to the same person. Cooking his favorite meals. Ironing his shirts. Giving up her own dreams of advancing at the bank so he could take the promotions that required traveling, networking, late nights at the office. She believed in them. In their partnership. In their future. And he'd been planning this. For how long? How long had he been moving money, forging signatures, setting her up to walk away with nothing? Her phone buzzed. A text message from an unknown number. Against her better judgment, she opened it. The photo loaded slowly. Derek and Brianna, dressed in expensive clothes, standing in front of what looked like a beach resort. Brianna's left hand was prominently displayed, showing off a diamond ring so big it was almost vulgar. The message beneath read, "Thanks for making this possible. We're getting married next month in the Bahamas. No hard feelings, right?" Naomi stared at that photo for a long time. Brianna was younger, prettier, thinner. Her skin glowed with the kind of health that came from expensive facials and yoga classes. She was everything Naomi wasn't anymore. Everything Derek apparently wanted. No hard feelings? Naomi started to laugh. It came out harsh and bitter, echoing in the small car. Hard feelings didn't even begin to cover what she felt. Rage, yes. Betrayal, absolutely. But more than that, she felt stupid. So incredibly, massively stupid for never seeing this coming. She'd been the perfect wife. The supportive partner. The woman who made sure his life ran smoothly while her own dreams collected dust in the corner. And this was her reward. 1 month's rent and a mocking photo from the man who'd promised to love her forever and the woman who'd helped him destroy that promise. Naomi deleted the photo and blocked the number. Then she started the car and drove. She didn't know where she was going. Away from the lawyer's office. Away from the house that was no longer hers. Away from the life she'd thought was real but turned out to be nothing but smoke and mirrors. She ended up at the park where Derek had proposed. It seemed fitting somehow, coming back to where it all began. She sat on the same bench where he'd gotten down on one knee, where she'd said yes through happy tears, where she'd believed she was the luckiest woman alive. I'm going to survive this, she told herself, watching ducks glide across the pond. I'm going to be okay. But sitting there in the fading afternoon light, with no job, no money, no home, and no husband, Naomi had no idea how that could possibly be true. What she didn't know, couldn't possibly know as she sat on that bench feeling like her life was over, was that Derek had made one critical mistake. One tiny error in his perfect plan to erase her from his life and steal their future. He'd hidden all that money in a bank. A very specific bank. And in 30 days, when a lawyer's letter arrived at her tiny new apartment, everything was going to change. But that was 30 days away. Right now, all Naomi knew was pain and loss and the bitter taste of betrayal. Right now, she had to figure out how to survive until tomorrow. And the day after that. And the day after that. She pulled out her phone and started searching for job listings. Rent-controlled apartments. Government assistance programs. Her pride wanted to resist, but pride didn't pay bills. She'd do whatever it took. Clean houses. Wait tables. Stock shelves. Anything to keep a roof over her head and food in her stomach. Derek thought he'd destroyed her. Thought he'd left her with nothing. He was about to learn he was very, very wrong. Naomi remembered the exact moment she fell in love with Derek Morrison. It was a Tuesday afternoon 16 years ago, and he'd walked into Regional Trust Bank where she worked as a teller with a deposit slip and a smile that made her forget to breathe. She'd been 24 then, fresh out of community college with an associate degree in business administration and dreams of working her way up to bank manager someday. The job didn't pay much, but she was good at it. She liked helping people, solving their problems, making their days a little easier. Derek had been 29, working as a sales manager for a medical supply company. He'd been nervous that day, she remembered. His hands had trembled slightly as he handed her the deposit slip for his first big commission check. $7,000. It was the most money he'd ever seen at once. This is going to change everything, he told her, his eyes bright with hope and ambition. This is just the beginning. Congratulations, Naomi had said, meaning it. She'd processed hundreds of deposits, but there was something about his genuine excitement that made her smile. You must have worked really hard for this. 3 months of 18-hour days, Derek had admitted, leaning against the counter in a way that suggested he wanted to keep talking. But it was worth it. My boss says if I can repeat this quarter's numbers, there's a promotion waiting. They talked for 20 minutes, much longer than was professional. Her supervisor had given her a look, but Naomi hadn't cared. Derek was funny and driven and had this way of making her feel like she was the only person in the room even though the bank was crowded. He'd come back the next week. Not to do any banking, he'd admitted shyly, but to ask if she'd like to get coffee after her shift. Their first date had lasted 6 hours. Coffee had turned into dinner, had turned into a long walk through the city, talking about everything and nothing. Derek had told her about growing up poor, about his single mother who'd worked 3 jobs to keep him in school, about his determination to build a better life. Naomi had shared her own story. Parents who'd divorced when she was young. A father who'd disappeared and a mother who'd done her best but struggled with depression. An Uncle Raymond she'd met exactly twice, who'd sent birthday cards with $20 bills but never visited. We're going to make it, Derek had told her that night, holding her hand as they sat on a bench overlooking the river. People like us were fighters. We don't give up. She believed him. God, how she'd believed him. They dated for 8 months before he proposed. It wasn't fancy. He'd taken her to this same park, gotten down on one knee with a simple gold band he'd saved for months to buy, and asked her to be his wife. I don't have much to offer yet, he'd said, and she remembered thinking his honesty was beautiful. But I promise you, Naomi, I'm going anywhere. 10 years from now, 20 years from now, I'll still be here. I'll still be yours. We're going to build something amazing together. She'd said yes without hesitation. The wedding had been small. Her mother and a few friends. Derek's mother, who'd cried through the entire ceremony. They'd honeymooned at a bed and breakfast 2 hours away because it was all they could afford. It had been perfect. Those first few years had been hard but happy. They'd lived in a cramped apartment, budgeting every dollar. Naomi had kept working at the bank while Derek put in brutal hours trying to climb the corporate ladder. They'd been a team. When he'd studied for his MBA at night school, she'd quiz him on accounting principles while folding laundry. When she'd gotten sick with the flu, he'd brought her soup and ginger ale and terrible jokes to make her laugh. The promotion to regional manager had come in their 5th year of marriage. Derek had been ecstatic. The salary was more than double what he'd been making. They could finally buy a house, take real vacations, start thinking about the future. That's when things started to change, though Naomi hadn't recognized it at the time. The new position required traveling. 3, sometimes 4 days a week. Derek would come home exhausted, stressed, distant. Naomi had told herself it was just the adjustment period. The new job was demanding. He needed her support. When he'd suggested she quit her job at the bank, she'd hesitated. "I'm making good money now," Derek had argued. "We don't need 2 incomes anymore. And honestly, babe, it would help me so much if you were home to handle everything here. I can't focus on work when I'm worried about grocery shopping and paying bills and scheduling car maintenance." It had made sense at the time. Her salary was significantly less than his. And he was right that managing the household took time and energy. If she quit, she could take care of everything at home, giving him the freedom to focus on his demanding career. "Are you sure?" she'd asked. "I like working. I was hoping to get promoted to assistant manager soon." "Of course I'm sure. We're partners, remember? Your success is my success. And you'll have plenty to do. Plus, think of all the projects you can finally tackle. That novel you wanted to write. Learning to paint. Whatever makes you happy." So she'd quit. And at first it had been nice. She'd had time to deep clean the house, to try new recipes, to finally read all those books stacked on her nightstand. But the novel never got written. The painting supplies sat unused. Mostly she'd waited for Derek to come home and felt increasingly useless. The house had come 2 years later. A beautiful 3-bedroom in a good neighborhood. Derek had handled all the paperwork. She remembered him saying something about putting it in his name only for tax purposes, something to do with his company benefits. She trusted him. Why wouldn't she? Looking back now, sitting in her car outside the park where he'd proposed, Naomi could see all the warning signs she'd missed. The way he'd gradually stopped asking about her day. The late-night phone calls he'd taken in another room. The weekends he'd started going into the office. The business trips that stretched longer and longer. She told herself every married couple went through phases. That the passion naturally cooled after a decade together. That his stress from work explained his short temper and lack of interest in her. She'd never once suspected another woman. Derek had always been so adamant about loyalty, about trust, about partnership. He'd told her 100 times that his parents' failed relationships had taught him the importance of commitment. What a joke that had been. Naomi wondered when it had started with Brianna. 3 years ago, according to what she'd pieced together from overheard phone calls and deleted text messages she'd recovered too late. 3 years of lies while she'd cooked his dinners and ironed his shirts and believed they were still a team. She remembered the night she'd found out. 6 months ago, though it felt like a lifetime. Derek had been in the shower and his phone had been on the kitchen counter. It had buzzed with a message. Naomi had glanced at it automatically, expecting a work email. Instead she'd seen, "Can't wait for next weekend, baby. Tell your wife you have that conference. Love you." Her whole world had stopped spinning. She'd stood there, staring at those words until the screen went dark. Then she'd opened his phone. He'd never bothered changing his passcode and found hundreds of messages. Photos. Emails. Hotel reservations. 3 years of evidence that her marriage was a sham. When Derek had gotten out of the shower, she'd been sitting at the kitchen table with his phone in front of her. She hadn't cried yet. The tears would come later. In that moment she'd felt nothing but a cold, spreading numbness. "I want a divorce," he'd said before she could speak. Not sorry. Not guilty. Just matter of fact, like he was ordering coffee. "I've been meaning to tell you. I'm in love with someone else. Her name is Brianna. We work together. I'm moving out this weekend." That had been it. No fight for their marriage. No apologies. No acknowledgement of 15 years together. He'd already checked out emotionally. The legal divorce was just paperwork. "What about our money?" she'd asked, her voice surprisingly steady. "The house. Our savings. Already handled." Derek had said, pulling clothes from their closet. My lawyer will be in touch. Don't worry, I'll make sure you're taken care of. Taken care of? Like she was a problem to be solved rather than the woman who'd given him the best years of her life. Naomi sat in her car now, watching the sun set over the same park where he'd proposed, and tried to remember what loving him had felt like. The memory was already fading, replaced by anger and betrayal and a determination to never be that naive again. Her phone rang. A known number. She almost didn't answer, but something made her press accept. Is this Naomi Morrison? A professional female voice asked. Yes, Naomi said cautiously. My name is Patricia Collins. I'm an attorney with Harris & Associates. I'm calling about your uncle Raymond Tucker. I understand he passed away 3 months ago, and we've been trying to locate his next of kin for estate settlement. Do you have a few minutes to talk? Naomi sat up straighter. I barely knew Uncle Raymond. I think I met him twice as a kid. Nevertheless, you're listed as his sole heir. There are some significant assets that need to be distributed. Would you be able to come to our office tomorrow at 10? What kind of assets? Naomi asked, her heart beginning to race. I'd prefer to discuss the details in person, Ms. Morrison. But I can assure you, it's worth your time to attend this meeting. Naomi agreed and hung up, staring at her phone in confusion. Uncle Raymond had been her father's older brother. After her parents divorced, her father had cut ties with everyone, including his family. Raymond had sent those birthday cards until she turned 18, then even those had stopped. She'd assumed he was dead or had forgotten about her. Apparently, she'd been wrong about a lot of things lately. Maybe, just maybe, something good was about to happen. The morning after receiving the divorce papers, Naomi had woken up in the guest bedroom of her friend Simone's apartment. Every muscle in her body ached like she'd been in a physical fight rather than an emotional one. Her eyes were swollen from crying. Her head pounded from dehydration and stress. Simone had brought her coffee and toast, sitting on the edge of the bed with the kind of gentle concern that made Naomi want to cry all over again. You can stay here as long as you need, Simone said. She'd been Naomi's best friend since high school, the one constant in her life through every up and down. Seriously, my couch is your couch. Forever if necessary. I can't, Naomi had said, sipping the coffee even though it tasted like cardboard. Everything tasted like cardboard now. You've got your own life. I need to figure this out on my own. You don't have to do everything alone, you know. That's what got you into this mess in the first place. Simone was right, though Naomi hadn't wanted to hear it. She'd spent so many years making herself small, manageable, easy. The perfect wife who didn't make demands or cause problems. Look where that had gotten her. That afternoon, she'd gone back to the house one final time to collect her things. Derek had texted that he'd be at work, which was both a relief and another knife to the heart. He couldn't even face her one last time. The house looked the same but felt completely different. All those years of memories now felt contaminated, like finding out a favorite food had been slowly poisoning you. She'd walked through rooms she'd decorated, past furniture they'd picked out together, and felt nothing but emptiness. She'd been packing her clothes, moving mechanically through the closet, when she'd heard the front door open. Her whole body had tensed. Derek wasn't supposed to be home. Hello? A female voice had called out. Derek. Naomi had walked out of the bedroom to find a woman standing in her living room. She was tall, with long dark hair and the kind of body that came from dedicated gym sessions. She wore designer jeans and carried a purse that probably cost more than Naomi's car. Who are you? Naomi had asked, though she'd already known. The woman's eyes had widened. Oh, you're still here. Derek said you'd already moved out. Not quite. Let me guess. Brianna? Brianna had at least had the grace to look uncomfortable. Look, I know this is awkward. Derek was supposed to tell me when you'd be gone. I'm just here to measure for new curtains. He gave me a key. He'd given her a key. To the house that was still technically Naomi's home for another 3 weeks. The casualness of that betrayal had somehow hurt more than all the rest. New curtains, Naomi had repeated slowly. You're redecorating already? I'm sorry, Brianna had said, though she hadn't sounded sorry at all. For what it's worth, Derek and I really did fall in love. These things happen sometimes. You can't help who you fall for. That's when something inside Naomi had snapped. Not into anger exactly. Into clarity. Did he tell you he emptied our accounts? She'd asked conversationally. That he forged a prenup to make sure I'd leave with nothing? Did he mention that part of your love story? Brianna's perfect face had shown the first crack of doubt. That's between you and Derek. I don't get involved in his financial stuff. Right. You just get involved with married men and then move into their homes before the divorce is even final. But sure, you're not involved. Look, I didn't come here to fight. I'm trying to be respectful of your situation. My situation, Naomi had laughed bitterly. My situation is that I gave 15 years to a man who was planning how to erase me from his life while I was cooking his favorite dinners. My situation is that I have 30 days to find somewhere to live because you need room for new curtains. That's not my fault, Brianna had said, her voice hardening. Maybe if you'd paid more attention to your husband, he wouldn't have looked elsewhere. Derek told me all about how you let yourself go. How you stopped trying. How he felt more like your roommate than your husband. The words had hit like physical blows, each one landing exactly where it would cause maximum damage. Because part of Naomi wondered if they were true. Had she let herself go? She'd gained weight over the years. She'd stopped wearing makeup daily. She'd chosen comfort over fashion. But she'd thought that's what happened in long marriages. You got comfortable. You stopped performing. Apparently, comfortable wasn't enough. Get out, Naomi had said quietly. This is going to be my house soon. I don't think you can tell me what to do. It's my house for 3 more weeks. Get out. Brianna had rolled her eyes but headed for the door. Before she left, she turned back with a smile that was pure poison. You know what? I'm glad this happened. Derek deserves someone who appreciates him. Someone who takes care of herself. Someone who isn't content being mediocre. The door had closed, leaving Naomi alone in the house that was no longer hers, with words that would echo in her head for weeks. Mediocre. Is that what she'd become? She'd looked around at the life she'd built. The photos on the walls showing a happy couple who didn't exist anymore. The furniture she'd picked because Derek liked it, not because she did. The kitchen where she'd cooked his favorites while forgetting her own. The bedroom where they'd slept together but stopped being intimate years ago. When had she stopped existing as her own person? When had Naomi the woman become just Naomi the wife? She'd finished packing her things in a daze. Clothes, books, a few personal items. Everything that was actually hers fit into 6 boxes and 2 suitcases. 15 years reduced to something that could fit in a car trunk. She'd taken one last look around before leaving. No tears this time. She'd cried enough. Instead, she'd felt something new growing inside her chest. Not quite hope, but something harder. Something sharper. Derek thought he'd won. Thought he'd successfully erased her from his life so he could start fresh with his younger, prettier replacement. Brianna thought she'd claim some kind of prize, moving into a house and a life built on lies. Let them have each other. Let them enjoy their moment of victory. Naomi had walked out of that house and promised herself she'd never be anyone's second choice again. She'd never make herself small for someone else's comfort. She'd never again believe that being selfless and supportive was the same as being loved. The meeting with Uncle Raymond's lawyer was tomorrow. She had no idea what to expect, but whatever came next, she'd face it as herself. Not Derek's wife. Not Brianna's victim. Just Naomi figuring out how to rebuild from the ashes of her old life. And if that rebuilding happened to involve making Derek regret everything he'd done, well, that would just be a bonus. The first night in her new apartment, Naomi had sat on the floor because she didn't have furniture yet. The place was small, a studio in a building that had definitely seen better days. The carpet was stained. The bathroom sink dripped. The windows didn't quite close all the way, letting in drafts and street noise. But it was hers. Or at least it would be hers as long as she could make rent. She'd opened her laptop and pulled up her bank account. The number staring back at her was terrifying. $273.16. That's what remained of her life savings after Derek had cleaned out their joint accounts. Rent was $800 a month. She'd paid first and last month plus security deposit, which had taken almost all the settlement money Derek's lawyer had generously provided. That money was supposed to tide her over until she found work, but it was already gone. She'd spent the evening applying for jobs. Retail positions. Restaurant work. Administrative assistant roles. Anything that might hire someone whose resume had a 10-year gap and whose references were all from a job she'd left over a decade ago. The responses had been swift and brutal. Overqualified. Underqualified. Position filled. Not what we're looking for. Thank you for your interest but no thank you. After 3 weeks of applications and rejections, Naomi had finally gotten hired at Savimart, a discount grocery store. The manager had barely looked at her resume before offering her 25 hours a week at minimum wage. You can start tomorrow, he'd said, his tone suggesting he was doing her a tremendous favor. 6 a.m. shift. Don't be late. Naomi had taken the job without negotiating. She couldn't afford to be picky. 25 hours at minimum wage wouldn't cover her bills, so she'd gotten a second job waitressing 3 evenings a week at a diner called Rosie's. Between the two jobs, she'd be working 60-hour weeks for less money than she'd made as a bank teller 16 years ago. The first month had been brutal. Her feet ached constantly from standing all day. She'd forgotten how physically exhausting retail and restaurant work could be. At Savamart, she stocked shelves, cleaned spills, and smiled at customers who treated her like she was invisible. At Rosie's, she served meals to people who complained about everything and tipped poorly if at all. She'd come home to her depressing apartment each night, too tired to do anything but microwave instant noodles and collapse into bed. The mattress was thin and uncomfortable, bought secondhand from a thrift store. She'd wake up sore and exhausted, then do it all over again. Simone had called regularly, offering to help. Naomi had refused every time. This was her mess to fix. She wouldn't drag her friend down into her disaster of a life. Money was a constant, gnawing anxiety. After rent, utilities, and food, she had almost nothing left. She couldn't afford internet, so she used the free Wi-Fi at the library. She couldn't afford her cell phone bill for 2 months, so she'd switched to a cheaper prepaid plan. She'd sold her wedding ring at a pawn shop for $200 and felt nothing when the clerk had barely glanced at it before making an insulting offer. Some nights, lying in bed listening to her neighbors fight through the paper-thin walls, Naomi wondered if Derek ever thought about her. Did he feel any guilt? Any remorse? Or was he too busy enjoying his new life with Brianna to spare a thought for the woman he'd thrown away? She'd seen them once, about 6 weeks after the divorce was finalized. She'd been walking home from her shift at Savamart, exhausted and sweaty in her uniform, carrying groceries she'd gotten with her employee discount. They'd been coming out of an expensive restaurant, laughing at something on Brianna's phone. Derek had looked good. Healthy and happy and well-dressed. Brianna had been wearing a dress that probably cost more than Naomi's monthly rent. They'd been so absorbed in each other that they'd walked right past her without even noticing she was there. Naomi had stood frozen on the sidewalk, watching them get into Derek's luxury car and drive away. That's when the full reality had hit her. He'd moved on completely. She was less than a memory to him now. She was nothing. That night, she cried for the first time in weeks. Not gentle tears but ugly, gasping sobs that left her feeling hollowed out and raw. She'd let herself feel every bit of the pain and humiliation and rage. Then she'd washed her face, made herself some tea, and pulled out the stack of job applications she'd been working through. Giving up wasn't an option. Not because she was brave or strong, but because there was literally no alternative. She had to survive. She had to keep going. What else was there? The lawyer's letter had arrived on a Tuesday afternoon, 3 months after the divorce. Naomi had been getting ready for her evening shift at Rosie's when she checked her mailbox and found the thick envelope from Harris & Associates, attorneys at law. She'd almost thrown it away. Lawyers meant trouble. Lawyers meant more bad news. But something had made her open it anyway. Dear Ms. Morrison, this letter is to inform you that you have been named as the sole beneficiary in the estate of Raymond Tucker, deceased. Please contact our office at your earliest convenience to discuss the distribution of assets. Time-sensitive matters require your immediate attention. Naomi had read the letter 3 times, certain she was missing something. Uncle Raymond had left her something? That seemed impossible. They'd barely known each other. Why would he leave her anything at all? She'd called the number listed, half expecting it to be a scam. But Patricia Collins had answered, professional and businesslike, and scheduled an appointment for the following day. What exactly did he leave me? Naomi had asked. I'd prefer to discuss the details in person, Ms. Morrison. But I can tell you that your uncle's estate is quite substantial. I strongly encourage you to attend this meeting. Substantial. That could mean anything. Maybe a few $1,000s. Maybe some old furniture or family heirlooms. Whatever it was, it would help. Even a small inheritance could mean breathing room, maybe enough to stop working 2 jobs and get her life back on track. Naomi had called in sick to both jobs the next morning, the first time she'd missed a shift. The meeting was at 10 a.m. in a downtown office building that made her feel underdressed in her cleanest jeans and a blouse from the thrift store. Patricia Collins's office was all dark wood and leather furniture and framed law degrees. The lawyer herself was a black woman in her 50s with silver hair and the kind of presence that commanded respect. Ms. Morrison, she'd said, shaking Naomi's hand firmly. Thank you for coming. Please sit down. I imagine you're curious about why you're here. Very curious, Naomi had admitted. I barely knew my uncle. Yes, I gathered that from my research. Raymond Tucker was an interesting man. Very private. Very shrewd. He made his fortune in banking and investments, but he lived modestly and stayed out of the public eye. When he died 3 months ago at age 78, he left very specific instructions about his estate. Patricia had pulled out a thick file and opened it. Your uncle never married and had no children. His brother, your father, preceded him in death by 15 years. That leaves you as his only living relative. But why me? Naomi asked. He barely knew me. We met maybe twice when I was a kid. According to the letter he left, he'd been keeping track of you from a distance. He knew about your marriage, your divorce, your current circumstances. He specifically mentions in his will that he wants to help you rebuild your life. His words, not mine. Naomi had felt tears prickling her eyes. A man she barely knew had cared enough to leave her something. After Derek had taken everything, after months of struggling to survive, someone had actually thought about her well-being. What did he leave me? She'd asked quietly. Patricia had smiled. Ms. Morrison, your uncle Raymond was one of the founding investors in Regional Trust Bank. He owned a substantial share of the institution. And he's left those shares to you. The room had tilted. Naomi gripped the arms of her chair, certain she'd misheard. I'm sorry, what? You now own 65% of Regional Trust Bank, Patricia had said clearly, making you the majority shareholder and, effectively, the owner of the institution. The bank's current value is approximately $62 million. Your shares are worth approximately $40 million. Naomi had stopped breathing. The numbers were too big. They didn't make sense. $40 million. That couldn't be real. I think I'm going to pass out, she'd whispered. Patricia had gotten her water and waited patiently while Naomi processed the information. $40 million. She'd gone from having less than $300 in her bank account to being worth $40 million. This is insane, Naomi had finally said. This can't be real. I assure you it's very real. There are some legal procedures we need to follow, some paperwork to sign, but the estate is straightforward. Your uncle made sure of that. Within 2 weeks, you'll have full access to your inheritance and control of your shares. Naomi had sat there stunned. Her first thought had been practical. She could quit her jobs. She could move out of that awful apartment. She could breathe again. Her second thought had been darker, more satisfying. Derek was going to lose his mind. Her third thought, the one that made her hands start shaking, was simple: revenge. The 2 weeks waiting for the estate paperwork to clear had been the longest of Naomi's life. She'd gone to work at Savamart and Rosie's in a daze, mechanically stocking shelves and serving food while her brain tried to process what was happening. $40 million. Owner of a bank. It didn't feel real. She'd catch herself doing math in her head at random moments. 40 million divided by her monthly expenses meant she'd never have to work again. Ever. She could live comfortably for the rest of her life without lifting a finger. But Naomi didn't want comfortable. Not anymore. She'd been comfortable with Derek, and look where that had gotten her. No, she wanted something different now. She wanted purpose. She wanted control. She wanted to matter. And she wanted Derek to know exactly how wrong he'd been about her. Patricia had called regularly with updates. The probate process was moving smoothly. The board at Regional Trust Bank had been notified that there would be a change in majority ownership. They were requesting a meeting with Naomi to discuss the transition. They're nervous, Patricia had said during one call. Your uncle was a silent partner. He let them run the bank without interference. They're worried you might want to make changes. Should I? Naomi had asked. That's entirely up to you. You're the majority shareholder. You can be as hands-on or hands-off as you'd like. But I'd suggest taking some time to learn about the business before making any major decisions. Regional Trust is a well-run institution. It would be a shame to disrupt that unnecessarily. Naomi had agreed. She'd spent her evenings at the library, using the free Wi-Fi to research banking regulations, corporate governance, and financial management. She checked out books on business strategy and leadership. If she was going to own a bank, she was damn well going to know what she was doing. The final paperwork had been signed on a Thursday morning. Patricia had walked her through each document, explaining what everything meant. Then she'd handed Naomi a folder containing bank statements, share certificates, and contact information for the Regional Trust Board members. Congratulations, Ms. Morrison, Patricia had said with a warm smile. You're now officially a very wealthy woman. Naomi had looked at the numbers on the bank statements. They still didn't seem real. The account balance showed $42,300,000 and change. More money than she could spend in 10 lifetimes. What happens now? She'd asked. That's up to you. My suggestion? Take a few days to let this sink in. Then schedule that meeting with the board. Get to know your investment. Figure out what you want to do with this opportunity. Naomi had thanked Patricia and walked out into the sunshine. The world looked different. She looked different. She was wearing the same thrift store clothes, but she stood taller, breathed deeper. For the first time in months, she felt like she could see a future that didn't involve constant struggle. She'd gone straight to Savamart. Found her manager in the break room. "I quit," she'd said simply. He'd barely looked up from his coffee. "Fine. Leave your vest at the front desk." No questions. No concern. She'd been completely replaceable. Part of her had wanted to tell him about the $40 million, to see his face when he realized he'd just dismissed a woman richer than he'd ever be. But that was petty and unnecessary. She'd removed her vest, left it on the desk, and walked out. Rosie's had been next. The dinner rush was just starting, but Naomi had found the owner and given her notice. Effective immediately? Rosie had asked, looking stressed. "Can you at least work out the week?" "I'm sorry, no. But I'd like to leave a tip for the other servers." She'd pulled out $500 in cash, payment from her last Savamart check, and left it on the counter. "That's for everyone working tonight. Split it however makes sense." Rosie had stared at the money like it might disappear. "Are you okay? Did something happen?" "Something good for once," Naomi had said. "Thank you for giving me a chance when I needed it." She'd walked out before the questions could continue. The freedom was intoxicating. No more early mornings. No more aching feet. No more smiling at people who treated her like she was invisible. Simone had been next. Naomi had shown up at her friend's apartment with Chinese food and an explanation that had taken 2 hours and left Simone speechless. "40 million, Simone had finally said. "Naomi, that's insane. That's absolutely insane." "I know. And you own a bank? Like actually own it?" 65% of it, yes." Simone had laughed, then cried, then hugged Naomi so hard it hurt. "This is the best thing ever. After everything Derek put you through, this is perfect. This is justice." "It feels like a dream," Naomi had admitted. "I keep waiting to wake up in my awful apartment with my shift at Savamart starting in an hour." "What are you going to do first?" Naomi had thought about that. The answer had come easily. "I'm going to learn everything about that bank. Then I'm going to make sure Derek finds out exactly how wrong he was about me being mediocre." The apartment hunt had been surreal. Naomi had hired a real estate agent and given her a budget that made the woman's eyes light up. Within 3 days, she'd found a beautiful 2-bedroom apartment in a luxury building with a doorman, a gym, and a view of the city that made her breath catch. She'd signed the lease and moved in immediately. Bought furniture that she actually liked, not what she thought someone else would prefer. Hung art that spoke to her. Created a space that felt like her own. The first night in her new apartment, Naomi had stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows looking out at the city lights and let herself feel the full magnitude of what had happened. She'd gone from nothing to everything. From powerless to powerful. And she'd done it without Derek. Without anyone. Just her and an uncle she barely knew who'd seen something in her worth protecting. The meeting with the Regional Trust Board was scheduled for Monday morning. Naomi had spent the weekend preparing. She'd read every document Patricia had given her twice. She'd researched each board member. She'd practiced what she wanted to say. She was nervous but ready. This was her chance to step into a new life. To prove to herself that she was more than just someone's discarded wife. And if that life happened to intersect with Derek's in interesting ways, well, she'd deal with that when it came. What she didn't know yet, what she wouldn't discover until she dove deep into the bank's account records, was that Derek had made one critical error. One mistake that would hand her the perfect revenge on a silver platter. He'd hidden his money in her bank. The Regional Trust Bank headquarters was a 12-story building in the financial district. Naomi stood outside Monday morning, looking up at the glass and steel structure, and tried to calm her racing heart. This was hers. Or 65% of it was, anyway. She dressed carefully in a new suit, professional and expensive. Her hair was styled. Her shoes were practical but elegant. She looked the part of a successful businesswoman, even if she didn't quite feel it yet. The security guard at the front desk directed her to the executive floor. The elevator ride seemed to take forever. When the doors opened, she was greeted by a receptionist who smiled warmly. "Ms. Morrison? They're ready for you in the conference room. Right this way." The conference room was impressive. Long table, leather chairs, windows overlooking the city. 6 people stood as she entered, professional smiles fixed in place. The CEO, Charles Bennett, was a silver-haired man in his 60s who'd been running the bank for 20 years. He shook her hand firmly. "Ms. Morrison, welcome. We're glad to finally meet you." Your uncle spoke very highly of you, though he kept his family life quite private. Thank you, Naomi said, taking the seat at the head of the table because she was the majority shareholder and it was her right. I'll admit this is all new to me. But I'm eager to learn. The meeting lasted 3 hours. They walked her through the bank's operations, its financial health, its competitive position in the market. Regional Trust was successful but conservative, serving primarily middle-income customers and small businesses. They weren't the biggest bank in the region, but they were stable and profitable. Your uncle's investment philosophy was always long-term stability over short-term gains, Charles explained. We've maintained that approach and it's served us well, especially during economic downturns. Naomi listened carefully, asking questions when things weren't clear. The board members seemed relieved that she wasn't planning to immediately shake things up. I'd like to take some time to really understand the business, she told them. Maybe shadow different departments, see how things work at ground level. Would that be possible? Of course, Charles said. We can arrange whatever access you need. You're the owner after all. Owner. The word still felt strange. After the meeting, Charles offered to give her a personal tour. They walked through the executive offices, then down to the main banking floor. Naomi watched tellers helping customers, loan officers reviewing applications, managers solving problems. It was all familiar from her own years as a teller, yet completely different from this side of the ownership structure. I'd like access to the full account database, Naomi said as they walked back toward the executive floor. I want to understand our customer base, see what kinds of accounts we're managing. Charles hesitated. That's quite a lot of data. Is there something specific you're looking for? Just general knowledge. I can't make informed decisions without understanding the details. Of course. I'll have IT set you up with full access. Though I should mention we have privacy protocols for customer information. Even as owner, there are regulations about. I understand, Naomi interrupted gently. I'm not looking to violate anyone's privacy. I just want to understand my own bank. By the end of the day, she had her own office, her own computer, and full access to the bank systems. She stayed late into the evening, scrolling through account data, familiarizing herself with the interface. She wasn't looking for anything specific, or so she told herself. But when a name caught her eye in the private vault account list, her heart stopped. Derek Morrison. She clicked on the account details, her hands suddenly shaking. There it was. A private vault account opened 2 years ago. The current balance showed $732,418. $700,000. Hidden in an account at a bank she now owned. Naomi sat back in her chair, her mind racing. This had to be the money he'd taken from their marriage. The savings, the investments, all of it liquidated and hidden in a vault account at Regional Trust Bank. The irony was almost too perfect. He'd thought this money was safe, private, untouchable. He'd probably chosen Regional Trust specifically because it was a smaller, more discreet institution. Less scrutiny than the big national banks. He had no idea his ex-wife owned it. Naomi pulled up the complete account history. The initial deposit had been made 2 years ago, right around the time Derek had started acting more distant. $700,000, deposited in a single transaction. There had been no withdrawals since. He was just letting it sit there, growing with interest, waiting for the right time to use it. Her hands were shaking as she printed the account details. This was evidence. Proof that Derek had hidden assets during their divorce. That he'd committed fraud. She could take this to a lawyer. Sue him. Maybe even have him arrested. But was that the revenge she wanted? Legal action would be satisfying, sure. But it would also be public and messy and would tie her to Derek for months or years of court proceedings. There had to be a better way. Naomi spent the next 2 weeks learning everything about banking law and asset seizure. She had conversations with Patricia and with the bank's legal team, carefully asking hypothetical questions about what could be done if someone was found to have hidden assets illegally. The answer was clear. If someone had committed fraud during divorce proceedings by hiding assets, those assets could be frozen pending investigation. If the fraud was proven, the assets could be seized as part of the legal settlement. But Naomi didn't want to seize Derek's money. She wanted something better. She wanted him to know what it felt like to have everything taken away. To be left with nothing. To realize too late that he'd made a catastrophic mistake. The plan formed slowly, carefully. She'd let Derek keep his money. For now. Let him think he was safe. Let him enjoy his life with Brianna, secure in his wealth and his cleverness. And then, when the time was right, she'd show him exactly who owned his sense of security. 3 months after discovering Derek's account, Naomi had transformed her life completely. She'd moved into a beautiful house, not just an apartment. 3 bedrooms, a garden, a home office where she worked learning the intricacies of banking and finance. She'd joined the board meetings at Regional Trust, gradually asserting her authority. Charles and the other board members had been surprised by how quickly she'd learned, how competent she'd become. She wasn't just a figurehead owner. She was actively involved, asking smart questions and making sound suggestions. "Your uncle would be proud," Charles had told her after one particularly productive meeting. "You have a real talent for this business." Naomi had smiled. She did have a talent for it. She just hadn't been given the chance to discover that until now. She'd also started rebuilding her personal life. Simone had introduced her to a book club, where she'd met other women who'd become friends. She'd started taking art classes, finally using those painting supplies she'd bought years ago. She joined a gym, not to change her body but because movement felt good and she liked feeling strong. She'd even gone on a few dates, though nothing serious. A professor named Christopher who taught literature at the local university. They'd met at a charity event the bank sponsored and he'd asked her to dinner. He was kind and intelligent and had no idea who she really was beyond woman who works for a bank. She told him about the divorce, though she'd downplayed the details. He'd shared his own story of heartbreak, a marriage that had ended when he discovered his wife had been cheating for years. The betrayal was worse than the divorce itself, he'd said over coffee on their third date. That feeling that the person you trusted most in the world was lying to your face every single day. Naomi had understood completely. But through all of this, through the new life she was building, there was always Derek's account sitting in the back of her mind. $700,000 just waiting. She checked it periodically, watching it grow with interest. He never touched it, never withdrew anything. He thought it was safe. Naomi had spent hours researching exactly what she could and couldn't do. As the owner of the bank, she couldn't just take the money. That would be theft. But she could flag the account for investigation if there was reasonable suspicion of illegal activity. And hiding assets during divorce proceedings? That was definitely illegal. The question was timing. When should she make her move? And how? The answer came from an unexpected source. Brianna called her. Naomi was in her home office reviewing quarterly reports when her phone rang from a number she didn't recognize. She almost didn't answer, but something made her pick up. "Hello? Naomi? Just Brianna. Please don't hang up." Naomi's hand tightened on the phone. "What do you want?" "I need to talk to you. About Derek. Can we meet?" "Absolutely not. Please. I know you have every reason to hate me. I know what I did was wrong. But I'm asking you to hear me out. It's important. Nothing you have to say is important to me." "He's been lying to me too," Brianna said quickly, her voice breaking. "About money. About our future. About everything. I think he's planning to leave me the same way he left you, and I don't know what to do." Naomi should have felt satisfaction. Should have enjoyed hearing that Derek was treating his replacement exactly how he'd treated her. Instead, she just felt tired. "That's not my problem," she said. "I know. You're right. But please just give me 15 minutes. There's a coffee shop on Madison Street. I'll be there tomorrow at 2. If you come, I'll explain everything. If you don't, I'll never bother you again." Brianna hung up before Naomi could refuse. Simone had strong opinions when Naomi told her about the call. "Don't go," she'd said immediately. "It's a trap. She wants something from you." "I know. But I'm curious. What could she possibly want from me?" "Money probably. Or sympathy. Or maybe Derek put her up to it to see if you'll give him ammunition for some new legal action." "I don't think so." She sounded genuinely scared. "So, she helped destroy your marriage. She called you mediocre. She doesn't deserve your help." Simone was right. Brianna didn't deserve anything from her. But Naomi found herself at that coffee shop at 2 p.m. anyway, driven by curiosity she couldn't quite name. Brianna looked different than she had 6 months ago. Thinner. More tired. Her expensive clothes couldn't hide the dark circles under her eyes. "Thank you for coming," she said as Naomi sat down across from her. "I wasn't sure you would. I have 10 minutes. Talk." Brianna wrapped her hands around her coffee cup. "Derek's been acting strange. He got really upset last week when I asked about buying a house. We're still in his rental, and I thought it was time to invest in property together. He got angry and said we didn't need to buy anything right now. That we should wait. So he doesn't want to buy a house. I'm still not seeing why this is my problem. That's not all. I found papers in his office. Legal documents. He's been consulting with a divorce lawyer. Naomi felt a tiny spark of satisfaction but kept her face neutral. Maybe he's just preparing for the future. Making sure his assets are protected. That's what I thought. But then I found something else. Bank statements from an account I didn't know existed. He has over $700,000 hidden somewhere. Money he's never told me about. There it was. The reason for this meeting. And you think I know something about it? Naomi asked carefully. No. But you know him. You were married to him for 15 years. Did he have secret accounts when you were together? Did he hide money from you too? Naomi could have lied. Should have lied. But something made her tell the truth. Yes. He emptied all our accounts before filing for divorce. I left the marriage with nothing. Everything we built together, he took it all. Brianna's face crumbled. That's what he's going to do to me. He's planning it right now. Setting everything up so I'll be left with nothing while he walks away rich. Probably. What did you do? How did you survive? I worked 2 jobs. Lived in a terrible apartment. Figured it out. But you're okay now? You look good. Healthy. Happy. I got lucky. An inheritance I wasn't expecting. But before that, I spent months barely surviving. Thanks to your affair with my husband. Brianna flinched. I know. I'm sorry. I really am. I thought he loved me. I thought we were different. But he's exactly the same person he was with you. Maybe worse. Why are you telling me this? What do you want from me? I don't know. Help. Advice? Someone who understands what he's capable of. Naomi finished her coffee and stood up. Here's my advice. Get your own lawyer. Protect yourself. Don't trust anything he says. And don't expect me to feel sorry for you. She walked out without looking back. Brianna could figure out her own life. Naomi had done that without help, and so could she. But the conversation had given her valuable information. Derek was planning another divorce. Which meant he'd want access to his hidden money soon. Which meant it was time to make her move. Naomi sat in her home office that night, surrounded by documents and legal texts. She'd been preparing for this moment for months, gathering information, consulting with lawyers, understanding exactly what she could and couldn't do. The situation was delicate. Derek had committed fraud by hiding assets during their divorce. That was clear. But Naomi couldn't just freeze his account and take his money. That would be theft regardless of what he'd done to her. What she needed was a way to expose his fraud legally, let the system handle him, and watch from a distance as his carefully constructed lies fell apart. She called Patricia first thing in the morning. I need to understand something, Naomi said. If someone commits fraud during divorce proceedings by hiding assets, what are the legal consequences? Serious ones, Patricia replied. Hiding assets is considered fraud upon the court. The person could face contempt charges, have to pay restitution to the injured party, and depending on the amount involved, even face criminal charges. Why do you ask? Hypothetically, if I discovered that someone had hidden assets in my bank during a fraudulent divorce, what would my responsibilities be as the bank owner? There was a pause. Are we still speaking hypothetically? For now. As a financial institution, you have certain reporting obligations. If you have reasonable suspicion that an account is connected to fraud or other illegal activity, you're required to flag it for investigation. The bank could face regulatory action if you knowingly ignored evidence of fraud. So I'd be required to report it? Required is a strong word. But yes, to protect the bank and yourself from liability, reporting suspicious activity would be the correct action. Naomi thanked her and hung up. The pieces were falling into place. Next, she called the bank's head of legal compliance, a sharp woman named Angela Chen who'd been with Regional Trust for 15 years. I need to understand our procedures for suspicious account activity, Naomi said during their meeting. Walk me through what happens when we identify a potential problem. Angela pulled up the protocols on her computer. We have strict guidelines from federal banking regulations. If we identify suspicious activity, we file a suspicious activity report with FinCEN. For activities involving divorce fraud or hidden assets, we'd also notify relevant law enforcement. And the account holder? Are they notified? Not initially. We don't want to tip off potentially criminal activity. The account would be frozen pending investigation. Then law enforcement or the courts would handle notification and further action. How long does an investigation typically take? Depends on complexity. Simple cases might resolve in a few weeks. Complicated fraud cases can take months. And during that time the account holder can't access their funds? Correct. The assets are frozen until the investigation concludes and a determination is made. Naomi nodded slowly. Thank you. This is very helpful. She spent the next 2 weeks building her documentation. She pulled Derek's account records going back 2 years. She gathered copies of their divorce proceedings, showing that no significant assets had been disclosed. She documented the timeline of when the money had been deposited and when the divorce had been filed. The evidence was damning. Derek had liquidated their joint accounts, hidden the money in a vault, and then filed for divorce claiming they had minimal assets to divide. Naomi consulted with 3 different lawyers, showing them the evidence without revealing her connection to the bank. All 3 agreed that this was clear fraud. The injured party could sue for their share of the hidden assets plus damages, one lawyer explained. And depending on the prosecutor, there could be criminal charges for fraud. What if the injured party didn't want to sue? Naomi asked. What if they just wanted the fraud exposed? The system would still proceed. Once fraud is reported to authorities, it's not really up to the victim anymore. The state has an interest in prosecuting financial crimes. Perfect. The final piece of her plan involved timing. She needed Derek to believe his money was safe right up until the moment it wasn't. She needed him to have plans for that money, to be counting on it, to feel secure. The opportunity came from an unexpected source. She was having dinner with Christopher when she saw them. Derek and Brianna sitting at a table across the restaurant. Derek was talking animatedly, gesturing with his hands. Brianna looked unhappy, her arms crossed. Christopher noticed Naomi's distraction. Everything okay? That's my ex-husband, she said quietly. Christopher glanced over discreetly. The one who left you with nothing? That's him. Do you want to leave? Naomi thought about it. Then she smiled. No. I want dessert. They stayed through coffee and dessert, Naomi making sure to laugh and enjoy herself. She noticed Derek noticing her. Saw his double take when he recognized her. Saw the confusion on his face when he took in her expensive dress, her confident demeanor, her obvious happiness. She didn't acknowledge him. Didn't even look his direction again. Just enjoyed her evening with a nice man who treated her with respect. As they were leaving, Christopher held her coat. Derek was standing near the front, apparently arguing with Brianna in hushed tones. He stopped when he saw Naomi. Naomi? She turned as if just noticing him. Derek. Hello. You look good. Different. Thank you. He waited, clearly expecting more. An explanation. An acknowledgement of their shared history. Something. Naomi just smiled politely and let Christopher guide her out. That was very satisfying to watch, Christopher said once they were outside. Was it that obvious? He looked like someone had just told him the sky was falling. I'm guessing he didn't expect to see you doing so well? He expected me to be broken. Struggling. Maybe even apologetic. But you're not. No. I'm really not. That night, Naomi made her final decision. It was time. She prepared a formal report documenting Derek's account, the suspicious timing of the large deposit, and evidence suggesting connection to divorce fraud. She included copies of their divorce decree showing no significant assets had been disclosed. Then she filed it with the bank's compliance department, with copies to the relevant regulatory authorities. The investigation would begin within 48 hours. Derek's account would be frozen. And then the dominoes would start to fall. Naomi didn't feel guilty. She felt nothing but a cold satisfaction. Derek had thought he was so clever, hiding his money where she'd never find it. He'd built his new life on stolen foundations, believing he'd gotten away with it. He was about to learn that some debts always come due. The first domino fell on a Wednesday morning. Derek walked into Regional Trust Bank to check on his vault account, something he did every few months to confirm his money was safe. Naomi wasn't there. She'd made sure to be at an off-site meeting that day, establishing her alibi. But the bank's security footage would later show Derek's face as the teller checked his account and her expression changed. I'm sorry, Mr. Morrison, but there's a flag on this account. You'll need to speak with a manager. A flag? What kind of flag? I'm not able to access those details. Let me get someone for you. The manager who came out was Tom Bradford, a longtime employee who'd been briefed on the situation. He led Derek to a private office. Mr. Morrison, I need to inform you that your account has been flagged for investigation regarding suspicious activity. Suspicious activity? That's absurd. I've had this account for 2 years without any problems. I understand. However, we're required by federal law to report certain types of transactions and account patterns. Your account has been frozen pending the completion of an investigation by regulatory authorities. Derek's face had gone white. Frozen? You can't freeze my account. That's my money. During an investigation, we're legally required to restrict access. I'm sorry, but I can't provide more details. You should expect contact from federal investigators within the next few days. This is insane. Who flagged my account? I want to speak to whoever made this decision. The flagging process is confidential. I can give you contact information for our legal department if you'd like to file a complaint, but the account will remain frozen until the investigation concludes. Derek had stormed out, according to Tom's report. He'd been angry, aggressive, demanding to speak to owners and threatening lawsuits. Naomi had read the report that evening and felt nothing. No guilt. No satisfaction. Just a cold recognition that justice was finally moving forward. The second domino fell 3 days later. Federal investigators contacted Derek regarding his divorce proceedings and the significant assets that hadn't been disclosed. Naomi knew about this because Patricia called her. Your ex-husband has been contacted by federal investigators, she said. Apparently they're looking into possible fraud during your divorce proceedings. I thought you should know in case they reach out to you. Will they? Almost certainly. You're the injured party. They'll want your testimony about what assets you believed existed during the marriage. And if I tell them the truth? That we had significant savings and investments that he claimed didn't exist. Then you'll be helping them build their case. Which is entirely your right. The investigators called 2 days later. Naomi met with them in Patricia's office, Patricia present as her attorney. She told them everything. The joint accounts that had been emptied. The investment portfolios that had disappeared. Derek's claims during the divorce that they had minimal assets to divide. Her suspicion that he'd hidden money but her inability to prove it. And you had no knowledge of his vault account at Regional Trust? The lead investigator asked. None. I only learned about it recently. How did you learn about it? I inherited ownership of the bank. I was reviewing accounts as part of understanding my new business. The investigators had exchanged glances. So you own the bank where your ex-husband hid the money he stole from you? I own 65% of it, yes. I didn't know about his account until after I became owner. That's quite a coincidence. My uncle left me the shares. He didn't know about Derek's fraud. They'd asked more questions, taken detailed notes, gathered documents. By the end of the meeting, it was clear they believed Derek had committed significant fraud. What happens now? Naomi asked. We complete our investigation. If the evidence supports charges, we forward our findings to the prosecutor's office. They'll decide whether to pursue criminal charges. And the money in the account? That's a civil matter. You'd need to file suit to recover your portion of the marital assets. But the criminal investigation will make that civil suit much easier to win. Naomi nodded. She had no intention of filing suit. She didn't want the money. She just wanted Derek to face consequences. The third domino fell a week later. Brianna left him. Naomi heard about this from Christopher, who'd heard it from a colleague who knew them both. Apparently, Brianna had discovered the investigation and immediately moved out. Can't say I blame her, Christopher had commented over dinner. If I found out my partner had hidden hundreds of thousands in fraud money, I'd run too. Naomi had said nothing. She'd learned from Christopher that Brianna wasn't just leaving Derek. She was cooperating with investigators, providing testimony about Derek's admissions to her about hiding money from his first wife. The fourth domino was Derek's job. His employer, upon learning about the fraud investigation, had placed him on administrative leave pending the outcome. They couldn't afford the liability of keeping an employee under investigation for financial crimes. The dominoes kept falling, each one faster than the last. Derek's lawyer fees mounted as he tried to fight the investigation. His frozen account meant he couldn't access the very money he needed to pay for his defense. He had to sell his luxury car. Move into a cheaper apartment. Watch his comfortable life crumble. Naomi heard all of this secondhand. She never contacted Derek. Never gloated. Never even acknowledged what was happening. She just lived her life. Ran her bank. Dated Christopher. Painted in her home studio. Spent time with friends. Built the future she'd thought was impossible 6 months ago. 8 weeks after the investigation began, Derek was charged with fraud, perjury during legal proceedings, and several other financial crimes. The prosecutor's office announced they would seek restitution for Naomi and recommended a sentence including community service and probation. Naomi was in her office when Patricia called with the news. "How do you feel?" Patricia asked. "I don't know. I thought I'd feel more. Satisfaction or vindication or something. Mostly I just feel tired. That's normal. Revenge rarely feels as good as we think it will. I didn't do this for revenge. I did it because it was the right thing." "Did you?" Naomi thought about that. "Maybe. I don't know anymore. Does it matter?" "Only to you." The final domino fell 3 months later. Derek stood in front of a judge and pleaded guilty to fraud charges. He was sentenced to 2 years of probation, 500 hours of community service, and ordered to pay restitution to Naomi for the full amount of marital assets he'd hidden. Naomi sat in the courtroom watching Derek accept his sentence. He looked diminished. Older. The arrogance was gone, replaced by exhaustion and defeat. Their eyes met once. She tried to find hatred there or satisfaction or anything really, but all she felt was indifference. He was just a stranger now. Someone she used to know who'd made terrible choices. After the sentencing, reporters tried to interview her. The story had gotten local media attention. Woman discovers ex-husband's hidden money in bank she inherited. Naomi declined all interviews. This wasn't a victory to celebrate. It was just closure on a painful chapter. Derek approached her as she was leaving the courthouse. His lawyer tried to stop him, but he waved her off. "I need to talk to you," he said. "I don't think that's a good idea. Please. Just for a minute." Naomi looked at Patricia, who nodded. They stepped into an empty hallway. "I'm sorry," Derek said quietly. "For all of it. The cheating, the lying, the way I treated you. You deserved better." "Yes, I did." "You really own the bank? That part wasn't just media exaggeration? I really own it." He laughed bitterly. "Of all the places I could have hidden the money. What are the odds?" "Pretty low, I'd imagine. Are you happy now? Seeing me like this?" Naomi considered the question honestly. "I'm not happy you're suffering. But I'm not unhappy either. Mostly I just don't care. You're not part of my life anymore. I really thought you'd never amount to anything without me. That you needed me to matter. I know. That's what made it so easy to leave you behind." She walked away without looking back. Derek called after her, but she didn't stop. Patricia caught up with her outside. "You okay?" "I'm better than okay. I'm free." And she was. The weight she'd been carrying for months, the anger and hurt and betrayal, it was finally gone. Derek couldn't hurt her anymore. He was just a cautionary tale, a reminder of who she'd been and how far she'd come. The restitution money was deposited in her account 2 weeks later. $732,000, plus interest and penalties. Naomi looked at the number and felt nothing. She donated the entire amount to a women's shelter that helped survivors of financial abuse. The shelter director had cried on the phone when Naomi told her about the donation. "This will change so many lives," she'd said. "You have no idea how much good this will do." But Naomi did know. She'd been one of those women. Broke and broken with nowhere to turn. If that money could help someone else rebuild, then maybe it had served a purpose after all. Derek's punishment was complete. Her revenge, if that's what it was, had succeeded beyond what she'd imagined. Now she just needed to figure out what came next. 6 months after Derek's sentencing, Naomi stood on the balcony of her home, watching the sunrise paint the city in shades of gold and pink. She held a cup of coffee, the expensive kind she'd never bought when she was married because Derek preferred the cheap store brand. Small pleasures. That's what she'd learned to appreciate. The freedom to choose her own coffee. To paint at 2 in the morning if inspiration struck. To say no without having to justify herself. Regional Trust Bank was thriving under her leadership. She'd implemented new programs to help small business owners access capital. Started financial literacy classes for the community. Expanded services to underserved neighborhoods. Charles had told her at the last board meeting that her uncle would have been proud. Naomi hoped that was true. She'd never really known Raymond, but she felt connected to him through the gift he'd given her. Not just the money in the bank but the chance to become who she was meant to be. Christopher had become a permanent fixture in her life. They'd been dating for 8 months now, taking things slow and steady. He made her laugh. He challenged her intellectually. He never tried to make her smaller to make himself feel bigger. Last week, he'd asked if she wanted to take a weekend trip to the mountains. "Just the 2 of us," he'd said. "No work, no phones, just time together." She'd said yes without hesitation. The old Naomi would have worried about leaving the bank for a weekend. would have stressed about every detail and contingency. The new Naomi knew the bank would be fine without her for 2 days. Knew that taking care of herself wasn't selfish, it was necessary. Simone had noticed the change in her. "You're different now," she'd said over brunch last Sunday. "Lighter somehow. Like you're finally breathing all the way in." "I feel different," Naomi had admitted. "I spent so many years trying to be what Derek needed that I forgot how to just be me. Now I'm remembering. And I like who I am. I'm still figuring things out, still making mistakes, but at least they're my mistakes now." Derek, according to mutual acquaintances, was managing. He'd completed his community service, working at various nonprofit organizations around the city. The work was humbling, they said. Cleaning offices, serving meals at homeless shelters, picking up trash in parks. He'd applied for a job at Regional Trust, apparently not knowing Naomi owned it. The HR director had called her personally to ask how to handle it. "Turn him down," Naomi had said without hesitation. "Politely, professionally, but definitively. I don't want him working here." "Understood. And for the record, even if you hadn't owned the bank, we wouldn't have hired someone with a fraud conviction for a financial institution." Derek had sent her one email after that rejection. She'd debated deleting it without reading, but curiosity won. "I know you had every right to turn me down. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness or your help. But I want you to know that I think about you every day. About how wrong I was. About everything I threw away. You were always enough. I just couldn't see it. I hope wherever you are, whatever you're doing, you're happy. You deserve to be happy." Naomi had read it twice, then deleted it. Derek's regrets weren't her responsibility. His growth, if it was genuine, wasn't about her. He needed to become a better person for himself, not to earn her forgiveness. She'd moved on. Really, truly moved on. The doorbell rang, pulling her from her thoughts. Christopher stood on her doorstep with a bouquet of flowers and a slightly sheepish smile. "I know we're not supposed to meet until tonight, but I couldn't wait. I wanted to give you this." He handed her a thin package wrapped in brown paper. Naomi opened it carefully to find a first edition of a book she'd mentioned loving months ago. "Christopher, this must have cost a fortune. You're worth it. Besides, I know someone who deals in rare books. I called in a favor." She kissed him, feeling grateful and lucky and absolutely present in the moment. "Want to come in for coffee? I was just thinking about how much my life has changed." They sat on her balcony talking about everything and nothing. Christopher told her about his latest research project. Naomi shared stories about the bank and the new programs they were developing. "You know what I love about you?" Christopher said after a comfortable silence. "You never act like you need to prove anything. You're just yourself. Confident without being arrogant. Strong without being hard. It's refreshing." "I didn't used to be this way," Naomi admitted. "I spent years making myself smaller. Easier. More palatable. Can I ask you something? About your ex?" "Of course. Do you ever regret how it all ended? The investigation, the charges, all of it?" Naomi considered the question carefully. "No. Derek made his choices. He committed fraud. He stole from me. The consequences were his to face, not mine to protect him from. If anything, I regret not standing up for myself sooner. You're remarkable, you know that?" She laughed. "I'm just someone who survived something hard and came out the other side. That's what makes you remarkable." Later that afternoon, Naomi drove to the women's shelter where she donated Derek's restitution money. She'd been invited to see how the funds were being used. The director, Maria, gave her a tour. They'd renovated living spaces, hired additional counselors, and created a job training program. "This woman, Sarah, she came to us 3 months ago," Maria said, introducing Naomi to a woman in her 30s. She'd been financially abused by her partner for years. No access to money, no job skills, nowhere to go. "Thanks to your donation, we were able to house her, get her enrolled in our training program, and help her find employment. She just signed a lease on her own apartment." Sarah shook Naomi's hand. "Thank you. You gave me my life back." Naomi felt tears prickling her eyes. "You gave yourself your life back. I just helped with the tools." On the drive home, Naomi thought about everything she'd lost and everything she'd gained. The marriage that had seemed like her entire world but turned out to be a cage. The poverty and struggle that had seemed insurmountable but had taught her resilience. The unexpected inheritance that had given her not just money but purpose. She'd lost Derek and gained herself. That was a trade she'd make every single time. That evening, getting ready for her date with Christopher, Naomi caught her reflection in the mirror. She looked different than she had a year ago. Not physically, though she'd certainly changed. But there was something in her eyes now. A confidence. A knowing. She'd survived the worst thing she could imagine and discovered she was stronger than she'd ever known. She'd faced betrayal and poverty and humiliation, and she'd rebuilt herself piece by piece. Derek had thought he was destroying her when he took everything. He'd actually set her free. The doorbell rang. Christopher, right on time, dressed nicely for their dinner reservation. "You look beautiful," he said, and she could tell he meant it. "Thank you. I feel beautiful." And she did. Not because of the expensive dress or the professional styling or the luxury home, but because she finally liked who she saw in the mirror. They had dinner at a restaurant Naomi had chosen. Not the kind Derek would have liked, but the kind she loved. Small, intimate, with incredible food and no pretension. Over dessert, Christopher took her hand. "I know we've been taking things slow, and I respect that. But I need you to know something. I'm falling in love with you, Naomi. Not who you were or who you're going to be. Just you, right now, exactly as you are." Naomi felt her heart squeeze. She wasn't quite ready to say the words back, but she was close. So close. "Thank you for that," she said softly. "For seeing me. For being patient. For not needing me to be anything other than myself. That's the only person I want you to be." They walked through the city after dinner, hand in hand, talking about the future. Christopher had been offered a position at a university in another state. He wasn't sure if he should take it. "What do you want to do?" Naomi asked. "I don't know. It's a great opportunity. But I'd be leaving you. We could make it work. Video calls, visits, whatever we need." "You wouldn't be upset?" "Christopher, I spent 15 years making my life smaller to fit someone else's needs. I'm not going to do that again. If this job is right for you, take it. We'll figure out the rest." He stopped walking and pulled her close. "How did I get so lucky? I could ask you the same thing." They kissed under a streetlight and Naomi felt happy. Genuinely, uncomplicated happy. No anxiety about the future. No resentment about the past. Just this moment, this man, this life she'd built from nothing. Later that night, alone in her home, Naomi pulled out a journal she'd started keeping. Dr. Harrison, the therapist she'd been seeing, had suggested it as a way to process everything that had happened. She wrote about Derek's sentencing. About seeing him diminished and defeated. About the surprising lack of satisfaction she'd felt. "I thought revenge would feel better," she wrote. "I thought watching him lose everything would heal something in me. But it didn't. Because the healing came from somewhere else. From building a new life. From learning to value myself. From understanding that his betrayal said everything about him and nothing about me." She paused, pen hovering over the page. "I forgive him," she wrote, surprising herself. "Not because he deserves it. Not because what he did was okay. But because holding on to anger was keeping me tied to him. And I don't want to be tied to him anymore. I want to be free." And she was free. Finally, completely free. The next morning, Naomi woke up early and went for a run. Something she'd started doing a few months ago, not to lose weight or change her body, but because she enjoyed it. Because it made her feel strong and alive. She ran through the park where Derek had proposed all those years ago. The same bench where she'd sat heartbroken, believing her life was over. She smiled at the memory of that devastated woman. If only she could have told her past self what was coming. The pain, yes, but also the growth. The struggle, yes, but also the triumph. "You're going to be okay," she whispered to that memory. "Better than okay. You're going to be extraordinary." At the bank on Monday, Charles called her into his office. "The board wanted me to thank you personally," he said. "Our profits are up 32% since you took over. Employee satisfaction has never been higher. You've transformed this institution." "We did it together," Naomi said. "I just brought some new ideas." "You brought vision, leadership, heart. Your uncle knew what he was doing when he left you these shares." "I hope so." "I never got to thank him. Thank him by continuing what you're doing. Building something meaningful. Making a difference." That evening, Naomi hosted a dinner party. Simone, Christopher, Maria from the shelter, Angela from the bank's legal team, and several other friends she'd made in the past year. Her home was filled with laughter and conversation and warmth. This was her life now. Rich in ways that had nothing to do with money. As everyone was leaving, Simone pulled her aside. "I'm proud of you," she said. "For everything. For surviving. For thriving. For becoming this person. I couldn't have done it without you." "Yes, you could have. But I'm glad you didn't have to." After everyone left, Naomi stood in her quiet home and felt content. She thought about Derek, probably in his small apartment, alone, facing consequences. She thought about Brianna wherever she was, hopefully learning not to build happiness on someone else's pain. She thought about all the versions of herself she'd been. The young teller who'd fallen in love with an ambitious stranger. The devoted wife who'd given up her dreams. The broken woman who'd lost everything. The survivor who'd worked 2 jobs. The unexpected heiress. The bank owner. The woman learning to love again. All of them were part of her story. None of them were the whole story. The whole story was still being written, and she was finally the one holding the pen. Naomi poured herself a glass of wine and stepped onto her balcony. The city stretched out before her, full of possibilities and promises and potential. Somewhere out there was her future. Adventures she hadn't had yet. Challenges she hadn't faced. Joy she hadn't experienced. She was ready for all of it. Derek had tried to erase her, to reduce her to nothing, to make her disappear. Instead, he'd given her the greatest gift imaginable, the chance to discover who she really was. And who she was, it turned out, was extraordinary. Not because of the money or the bank or the perfect revenge. But because she'd faced the worst and come through it intact. Because she'd chosen to rebuild rather than remain broken. Because she'd learned that being enough for herself was more important than being enough for anyone else. The sun was setting, painting the sky in brilliant colors. Naomi raised her glass in a silent toast. To Uncle Raymond, who'd seen potential she hadn't known existed. To Simone, who'd never given up on her. To Christopher, who was teaching her what real love looked like. To herself, for refusing to stay down. "Here's to new beginnings," she said to the empty air. "And to never ever looking back." And she never did.